Ahmed with us. First of all, Ahmed is a friend, number one. Number two, he has been a student in a postgraduate program that we had some years ago with other schools, other European schools from Venice to Delft, etc. And we had the pleasure to have Ahmed with us. And he, together with his friend and colleague, Kaveh Rashidazeh, they were these two fantastic Iranian students. And they were at the moment which, together with Bernardo Secchi, we were starting to study with the Greater Paris. So Ahmed participated, and some of the drawings that sometime I show are still those realized in that moment. Then Ahmed made a lot of different things. First, a PhD together with Pier Vittorio Aureli, that is here, a very interesting PhD about the idea of paradise. Maybe he can tell you something after the lecture. And then he was teaching at the AA for many years, and then now more recently at the College of Arts.
Delft and EAA.
Delft first. Ah, yes, you're right. Sorry, Delft for some years, then EAA, and then the AA, and then okay. And then he started to write books. So now he's very prolific in writing very beautiful and big books about certain authors. And here is one author that he will present to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paola.
I think you have to use, no, it's okay.
Oh, I'm very, very happy to be here this evening, tonight, and sorry because of the delay. My name is Ahmed Khosravi, as Paola just mentioned. I'm very thankful to Paola and the team of Habitat and Valentin in particular for inviting me and arranging this kind of the entire journey. I think whomever is joining us on Zoom, you're fine, you're seeing a proper slide, but sometimes inside the room, the slide will make a blink. So bear with us, it comes back. I'm also very, very happy and excited to present here in this faculty, especially because it's the first of series of talks that I'm gonna have, hopefully, about the recent research project, curatorial project and publication about the work of Zoe Zengelis, and also particularly in this faculty because it has been the hotspot of discussion I think the projector is not really happy with us. Try to make the other one. Sure. Whatever you did, it stopped. Okay, so maybe we will make this one later on. Eventually, sure. Yes. Maybe you will. Should I use this one? Sorry for the inconvenience.
Just show your screen again.
Okay.
Try the full screen just to see the images.
There is a bit of problem with that. Yeah, that's so I think yes, it's gonna be fine, I guess now. Sure.
No, the problem is that
I will manage it. From here, you can just come back to share, reprendre within share.
This one?
Yeah.
Can you test? Can you check if it's sharing?
Mike, is it working for Mike? Is it working for Zoom? Perfect.
Yes, you can pass the slide, please.
Are you sure? Ah, this is another thing. Is it sharing? Is it changing?
Yeah, it's changing.
Okay. Shall I continue or should I wait for the correction of the thing?
Oh, okay, 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 good. Yeah, but so, yeah, let's stay like that.
Perfect.
Okay.
I was just saying that I'm so excited. I am very excited to have this discussion here because this faculty has been hotspot in discussion about and around the work of OMA, specifically the canonical work by Roberto Gargiani and the recent publication by Christoph and Garvey, which reviews the text and interviews by the OMA members and about those projects. And of course, the amazing project by Sebastian Marot, which I hope that he will join us in a couple of minutes. I hope that the talk today would add a bit or to this line of discussion that is started and initiated in this faculty and by its prominent members and shed a new light to a very important period in architecture, in the contemporary history of architecture, where art and artists play an important role in it. Though I'm mostly going to talk about Zoe Zengelis, the lady at the far right of the image, whom we probably know as one of the co-members and co-founders of OMA, the Office of Metropolitan Architecture. She belongs to a generation of artists whose artistic practice actually developed in the post-war period and within all the social political milieu of the time. Went beyond any aesthetic of common sense, these artists, or more precisely painters, abandoned grand narratives and refused to serve institutional projects, social or political agendas. And they chose to be, as Frank Auerbach, the painter, once claimed, soul coherent units. Zengelis stands out actually within the group of predominantly white and male painters by virtue of her singularly surrealistic gaze, which lends actually very the modernistic rationality of the projects of the time, architecture of the time, and spatial arrangements with a melancholic taste. Her work, or for example, the one that we're seeing in the slide called Urban Landscape from 1985, animates its seemingly static setting through the conjunction of geometrical forms, grids, and oblique geometries. The eye moves almost delicately across the scene, drawn into perplexing shadows and the grids that they collapse into each other under a dreamlike light. Urban Landscape, this painting, belongs actually to a tradition of modernist art that has flourished through the ongoing dialogue between performance, film, photography, and painting. Its clearest example and expressions can also be found in pre-war or interwar period in the works of a painting of Di Chirico, for example, or even in cinema and cinematography in very famous movies like last year in Marienbad, 1961, or even very reference to many of the works that Zoe made and the group OMA produced at the beginning, the famous Robert Faines movie, The Cabinet of Dr. Cagliari from 1920s. In Zengelis's paintings, a playful yet iconoclastic combination of visual and mental ecstasies evoke a very particular form of urban composition, if you like. One that perhaps is a surreal hybrid between Aegean landscape of her youth and the metropolitan tectonic of cities that he lived in and she lived in and she worked in, like Paris, Berlin, New York, or London, where she's been living and working since 1955. There are in fact unique qualities in her work that, although share common threads with the generation of post-war modernist painters in Britain in particular, but at the same time branches out and creates a distinct, let's say, frame of reference for her artistic career. We could also trace it back into her own work, as she once claimed, I'm attracted to man-made landscapes within my work because I found them an easier setting in which to express the mysteries of human emotions. On my stage in the mist, at the down, or under a layer of muslin, my geometrical elements dramatize themselves in the diffused light, mysteriously extenuating the atmosphere and mood. These qualities that she just talks about became more vividly evident once Zengelis's work enters the territory of mid-century architecture in Britain, a scene highly dominated by rationalist functionalism. She arrived in London with her first husband, Ilya Zengelis, who studied at the Architectural Association during 1950s. It was at this moment that her world of painting and his world of architecture collided, grew together, and almost became one. It was in 1972 that their collaboration materialized through the very first project that we associate with the group or with the OMA, the Exodus, or the Voluntary Prisoners of Architecture. That there she collaborated with Ilya Zengelis, Rem Koolhaas, and Madeleine Friesendorp to making the Exodus as an entry to a competition announced by Casabella magazine titled "The City as a Significant Environment." This was the first official project by the four founding members of the group that 3 years later they called themselves OMA, or Office for Metropolitan Architecture. Although the role of painting was quite minimal in the first submission or the first project, the Exodus, it was through their next projects, specifically the City of the Captive Globe, 1972, and this project, the Egg of Columbus Center, 1973, that Zengelis found her sense of liberty within this group dynamics. From this point onward, her work was an integral part of OMA projects, if not was the only OMA projects, until she ended her official collaboration with the office in 1985, after completing a series of paintings for their entry to the famous competition Parc Citroën in Paris, which this is the last official painting for OMA that she made. Zengelis' separation from OMA, of course, did not end or even overshadowed her involvement with architecture as a discipline or even as a culture. It was in 1982 that, together with Madeleine Friesendorp, she was invited to AEA to run a color workshop, a course that still exists today, was invented almost by them in early 80s. And ran a project for 13 years in the school, which changed the culture of architecture, not only within the school, but also soon globally. The legacy, in a way, and the change that they brought into AA at the time was to reintroduce painting as a mode of thinking, not as a end result or byproduct of an architectural project. So as a mode of thinking and as a kind of canvas for design, thinking about the space, light, color, and proportion. A fundamental shift that even made Architectural Association to publish their books in color from then onwards, 1982, because they had to then represent and promote their student works that they were all paintings. Methodologically, these color workshops were informed by ways in which Madeleine Friesendorp and Zoe Zengelis contributed to OMA projects. So they were using almost the same methodology. They were giving the students exercises of different techniques. For example, we are seeing here almost the same scene painted in acrylic, pencil, and watercolor. they were giving lectures of how different painters taken from different parts of the history. Of course, they were interested in particular periods in their units. Deal with the painting as a construction of a narrative. In a way, also, we have to just mention that even within the AA in those years, even within units like famous Diploma Unit 9 that was famously run by Rem Koolhaas and Ilya Zengelis, the collaborators, the drawings were axonometric drawings, line drawing, ink drawings on paper. So in a way, the fashion of the time in terms of drawings were black and white. And it was through, let's say, the progression of the introduction of color and thinking that this dominance of black and white drawing was kind of changed into paintings. I will later go back to some of those projects to discuss more in detail. The color workshop helped Zoe Zengelis to rebuild a thematic and independent body of work, and that following her departure from the OMA, created a larger scale. She curated the largest scale exhibition of her work at the AA actually in 1985 with 50 something paintings, between which the exhibition was the first independent exhibition of her work, was called Zizi at the AA, which became a milestone in Zengelis' artistic career in the years after. As Kenneth Frampton stated in his review of the exhibition, it was a declaration of independence, a move to define and redefine her own position, not only as a painter, but also as a spatial thinker and almost a designer, and also reaffirming her affinity with architecture. In the same year, AA Files, which is the Journal of Architectural Association, published another review by the British art critic Joshua Rankart that described Zoe Zengelis' work as a theater of architecture, comparing her work, her body of work, to architecture of imaginary film sets, wherein all the components of the scene carry a sense of direction, movement, animation, and drama. These qualities could be also discussed in light of her trainings and education that I will show you in a moment. With this rather long introduction and overview, we can go perhaps a bit deeper to some of the projects to discuss the process of this work and how it kind of merged artistic practices with architectural discipline. And I should also mention that for this kind of research that I'm presenting, part of it here tonight, I used basically two different complementary methods. First is basically against the common fascination with Rem Koolhaas's self-curated own narrative. I tried to a bit integrate other narratives from the collaborators, students, and the three other founding members, which in a way it's been years of discussion with all those people, and delving also into almost archaeologically, delving into the process of painting, finding sketches, and even if we see here, for example, an example of a painting for a famous project, Checkpoint Charlie in Berlin, the first project built actually from the OMA work. So the process that leads to an image that we associate with the project and then we celebrate in architectural history and discourses. So I was more interested to see how it's been done. Therefore, the communication between the four members and the other collaborators, sketches, references, all were part of, let's say, or had to be part of the research and the discussion. Again, here, it was a moment interviewing Ilya Zengelis and Sue Rogers as they were first running they started teaching at the AA together for the first time in an intermediate school. These early projects that probably I'm going to show a couple of them are created by the four members of the OMA cannot be separated from their images. They are in fact visual manifestos before everything else. this was in fact celebrated in their first two exhibitions, which both happened in 1978. First one in Stuttgart and second one at the Guggenheim, which we see here the poster of the exhibition, the second exhibition. It was actually in this period, still the four founding members, also together with Zaha, were almost equally represented, equally present, and equally active in both making of those fantastic projects and also presenting and being the forerunners of the office. But more and more in the years after, the three fantastic women, specifically Madeline and Zoe Zengelis, in a way took the backseat. Was it by choice or by force? History will tell us. But soon OMA paintings also have been relentlessly reproduced in magazines, books, digital media, and even these days, online platform that are inevitably used. These paintings are used as mere illustration rather than not only paintings or projects, to be consumed with no respect almost to the properties of the actual artwork, the original proportion, measurements, even in many magazines, if you go across and flip through, they're printed upside down or flipped. So in a way, the entire fundamental issue of creating a project through a painting is quite challenged, and if not insulted through the ways in which this, let's say, series of paintings and images is distributed and redistributed and consumed by us. And we are the guilty one in the schools of architecture, because we are the one fascinated by this, and we somehow forget what they are in their spatial and intellectual elements. So this condition almost flattened, if not dismissed, the inherent meanings of both theoretical, these paintings and images as theoretical manifestos, but at the same time technical documents. There were plans, sections, measured, drawn in a certain way to illustrate a technical building that, as the four members claimed and still claim, they were actually very practical buildings. They were to be built and constructed. In the following, I will discuss the process of a couple of these projects in order to highlight this kind of collaboration, use and misuse of some of these paintings. Zoe Zengelis received her first trainings when she was a teenager in Athens from a painter, very famous landscape painter called Orestes Kanelis, which he is also an elusive and interesting figure that he was imprisoned because of his political activism in the years after. But his kind of tradition of landscape painting is quite central in the study of Greek contemporary modern painting. When moved in London in mid-50s, she first attended classes in interior design in back then Regent Street Polytechnic, which is now known as Westminster School of Architecture. And the art part is now part of the Chelsea School of Art. It was then at the same time one unit, within one technical school. Then after a term or two, she abandoned interior design and changed her degree to stage design. She expressed her dissatisfaction with the stage design in a couple of interviews that she gave during the last couple of years, and said their tasks were quite boring because they had to sit, the professor were asking them to sit in V&A for V&A Museum for a long time, sketching actually the same Victorian chairs and costumes and paintings over and over. So there were no room for interpretation, no room for creativity and invention. And that's why she changed again to painting. And it was an interesting period in the history of British modernist paintings, because she studied under famous figures like Leon Kossoff or Frank Auerbach, which soon became basically the monuments of the entire British modernist paintings. She, it is, although she claims that their influence on her were minimal, we are seeing here, for example, one of the paintings of Frank Auerbach. But we can trace some common threads and layers, name it color palettes, even brush stroke, or even more importantly, their sheer interest into cities. That was basically became the subject of paintings at the time, specifically in these generations. Here we see a painting by Zoe Zengelis, which could be comparable to the style, if you like, or even topics that Auerbach or Kossoff were discussing and painting that time. You see here again two sketches. Left is Auerbach, right is Zoe Zengelis. It is within this period of her life that Zengelis joined forces with her husband, Ilya, Rem Koolhaas, and Madelon in entering the world of architecture. By painting for OMA, I became confident enough to become a painter in my own right. So she didn't have enough time to practice her own, let's say, body of independent work. The start of her career basically was through OMA projects. In summer of 1972, while the 4 founding members of the OMA were still living in London, all of them, Koolhaas ran, after graduation from Yale, ran a workshop, a summer workshop at the Architectural Association on the architecture of Manhattan. It's still June, July 1972. The ambition of the research was clearly to represent the metropolis of the time, Manhattan, as a visual, in a visual manifesto, as a carpet of multiple ideologies, architectural ideologies and artistic ideologies. He started working and communicating with Zoe about it. He sent this kind of touristic maps of New York or Manhattan, if you like, of the time to Zoe with some notes that these ideas need to be presented, and this is the idea of the workshop that I'm teaching. The central concept was, again, very straightforward: the city as a carpet of different ideologies. So this painting that we associate with the project became the first iteration of using painting as a mode of thinking within this kind of dynamic of the four members. In this particular project, actually, the duo between Rem Koolhaas and Zoe Zengelis have the central role. They use it as the poster of they put it in the poster of the first exhibition in Stuttgart. And these are the sketches that she made at the time. And similar to other paintings of OMA, neither Koolhaas nor Ilya Zengelis had any role in making of the final painting. It was all Zoe's works. Here is a note that Ilya Zengelis wrote for the book, and he basically described what I just said. Rem sent us a pencil drawing that represented Manhattan in a three-dimensional grid of identical blocks, pedestals that carried modern architectural most iconic buildings. Zoe decided to color these drawings and painting the blocks as granite plinth while giving distinctive colors to hosted buildings on the top of each. She then sent the drawing back to Rem and instantly received a thrilled reply. I sent you a rough sketch and I received a masterpiece back. This was the city of a captive globe. Similar, here is also another document, a letter from Rem Koolhaas to Zoe and Ilya Zengelis in March 1973, where actually Rem discusses with them how excited they are so they can sell this painting and make a living out of it when they are now living as a student in New York. Of course, you can hopefully read it. I with Maddie, we now have to worry about how to maintain your continuing support. In other words, a new pleasurable agony is added to the spectrum that is losing your interest, which he means interest in working with us. So this was the first moment that also paintings became the source of income for the groups, if you like. She, in fact, did not paint one of the city as a captive globe, city of the captive globe. At least 4 is recorded. And simply it was to sell this painting to support the office. And also some of them are intentionally made multiple times, and some of them are just the process of the painting that she was experimenting with different colors. For example, we see here that she will experiment with different techniques, different colors, even different buildings. Still till today, original paintings are being credited mostly to Rem Koolhaas. I mean, it's really astonishing that even museum like MoMA or Deutsche Architecture Museum in Frankfurt, they don't recognize the credit of the maker and actually the painter or the artist of this project. Actually, this is one of the examples. Beyond the major problem of editing out these women's names and their arts from the dominant narrative of architectural history and criticism, there has been also another layer of almost lousiness in the discussion around these projects. It was, as it was in the case of the city as a captive globe, there are multiple versions of these early OMA paintings. Each has its own unique color palettes, ideas, details, composition, and dimensions. However, they're all regarded as one and simply reproduced as if they are the same. Actually, each one talks about different projects. And I would argue that, again, us architects or academics are the guilty ones here, not to distinguish these very fine details, which at the same time, it is the very core of these projects. Here we see actually Madeleine Friesendorf's repainting of the city of the captive globe in 1994. This was in fact only one example to show how these projects are systematically misrepresented. The same story goes with other projects like famously Hotel Sphinx, Roosevelt Island, housing projects, or paintings of their own house in Kratikos. The details of each one is discussed in the book. I must also mention that a typical process of these paintings, these early projects have been like a brainstorming between 4 members. As I've been told, or they discuss, usually Rem Koolhaas has the higher voice, and then Ilya Zengelis joins to criticize, and let's say the collapse of minds in a way gives a kind of room for a new project that is a kind of combination of all the ideas. Then series of phone calls, because they're living in different parts of the world. Two members are in London, 2 members are in New York at the time. Then series of phone calls, letters, postcards, even misread faxes are being communicated, sent back and forth, depending on each project, of course. And then all these communication are being represented and thought through the medium of painting, sketched as they discuss. For example, here we see one of the first earliest sketches of the Hotel Sphinx in 1974. Group discussions on images and references goes on, and specifically Zoe Zengelis is the one that adds, removes, modifies these paintings as basically the main canvas around which the project is taking shape. Here is a letter by again by Rem Koolhaas to a part of a letter by Rem Koolhaas to Zoe and Ilya when they sent him to New York the first sketches of the Hotel Sphinx, and he's replying, suggesting that, okay, I really like it. I just, especially the Crown of Thorn, Rockefeller, Chrysler, Times Square Hotel, and the galleries needs to be added. You should draw it in a small axonometric together with the Portman Hotel, for which I'm going to send you photocopies. Perhaps the ground floor needs to be more like an Oasis prison-like environment to transport the visitors more directly to another world. So this is a kind of discussion that they have. Basically, a project is being described in Word, in words, in paintings, and being kind of synthesized into series of in progress canvases, and which Zoe is the main director, if you like, of these processes. Then if the painting is decided to be small, then it is usually Ilya Zengelis that sketches the line drawings as a kind of axonometric or plan or section. Or if it needs to be discussed in the larger sizes, then usually the collaborators are the one that usually enlarge the first sketches into panels of 2 meter long, if you like. And then the process of the tests of the idea starts, which, for example, we see here a couple of versions of the famous Hotel Sphinx projects. Again, Ilya, I'm referring here to his own words and memories, that it was not a rendering. It was a transformation that gave the composition a renewed momentum. Through this fresh impetus, Zoe managed to invest the OMA projects that include her paintings with a beauty and a level of excellence that bear her mark, a quality that is singularly manifest in her work up until today. There are, of course, stories about and details of each one of these projects that has been discussed multiple times and in numerous ways in magazines, lectures, and seminars. But I just, and if you have to discuss them, we will stay here for hours. But I just want to end the examples here with this particular project, which is their entry to the extension of Dutch Parliament in 1978. It was a moment that Zaha Hadid joined the team only for this project, and the designers, Zaha, Ilya, and Rem, couldn't work together. So basically, they divided the project to 3 different parts, and they said that, okay, we go to different rooms, we work for days, and we just put the things back together. So they literally stitched different parts of a building, which they designed basically through only first ground rules together in order to create this kind of monsters, if you like. And it's Zoe Zengelis that has the difficult job of blending them together into a project, basically. So the paintings become, in a way, resolves all those misalignments, irrationalities, if you like, and problems of the 3 competing minds, in particular in these projects. And so much didn't work that Zaha left the office right after. So in a way, there are famous fights and stories about it, as you might know. But it shows the very particular and very innovative collaborative dynamics between the 4, or in this case, 5 members. Each one has its own role. They change their role, they interpret each other, they misinterpret each other. And that's the kind of qualities that shows itself and manifests itself into the nature of these very critical projects, if you like. A very fundamental shift happening towards the end of 1970s. In particular, the 2, they started settling in 2 different, from London and New York. They started to divide the works between 2 other centers, Rotterdam and Athens. So Rem moves to Rotterdam and takes, let's say, the main role there, and Ilya moves temporarily to Athens and almost establishes a mini office there. And they both work with different projects, although all the members are collaborating with each other at the same time. But because of the nature of project that the Greek office, as they would have called it, receives, there is a shift in the nature of the projects from tectonic and metropolitan, let's say, manifestos to landscape projects, specifically in Greece, in the islands in Greece and in Paris. Referring back to which these are particular projects that, although it's very, let's say, the scenery is the main, let's say, medium through which the idea of the project is discussed. But I also want to refer back to what I just mentioned a couple of minutes ago, that all these drawings are technical drawings in order to describe a project, in order to be handed to a client, in this case, even the municipality. So it is interesting how that technical elements shows itself or being reinterpreted by the artist or by Zoe Zengelis in this case, and at the same time maintaining its values and its role within the narrative of the project. This particular project called San Gracimo's Sacred Path is a project commissioned to OMA to develop temporary infrastructure for the pilgrimage that is happening every August in the island of Kefalonia between the village and the church of San Gracimos. It's a very particular ritual with very picturesque, with many icons and costumes. You might know about it. Basically, Zoe, this is the only visualization of the project that was produced, and Zoe basically decided not to present anything from the project. So for her, the main idea of the project was a landscape where the project sits in, and of course it also works with the idea of the temporary infrastructure and the seasonality of it, that brings the landscape into a kind of almost the protagonist of what's happening every August there. This is the sketch that Ilias Veneris, their collaborator in the office, made. Basically, is this path between the church and the village, and series of poles and plugs and, let's say, platforms that could host for a month or two pilgrims. Zoe more and more took a central role in this series of landscape project. And here we are seeing another project called Hotel Terma, or 1,000 Olive Trees, which is perhaps the first project that she experimented with plans. So basically the plan is a painting. In this painting, which is rather large, is almost 2 meters wide and 1.6. There is a delicate balance between very well measured buildings that actually is the object of design, and topographic nature of landscape and the changing nature of it. Colors, let's say, the way that the forest meets the beach and the beach meets the water, and the way that everything is kind of blended together into a kind of shades of colors. The project brief was to design a seaside resort and a marina, which we can see it's here, and huts and bungalows for the seasonal hunters, a hotel and series of villas, and a communal facilities at the end. So it was not that the entire project works together, every part of it works for the part of the year. And another illustration of this project, Zoe, and this was a landscape that was dominated by olive trees, and that's why it's called 1,000 Olive Trees. She literally painted 1,000 olive trees, and the entire challenge was how to paint this in order to again bring the landscape to the forefront of the narrative and the purpose of the discussion and the project, and at the same time selling the project, if you like. So this was the first etude and the first sketch of the painting, and then the painting develops into this one and another variation that she made a couple of years later with different techniques. The previous one was acrylic, and this one is oil. Zengelis almost perfected her take on plan painting in this project. 16 villas in Antiparos, a project for another island in Greece. If the city of the captive globe was a kind of manifesto for metropolitan architecture of the group, perhaps 16 villas in Antiparos is the manifesto for the landscape projects. It was a series of villas let's say, commissioned to Ilyas Zengelis and the office, 16 villas. Never realized except one, which is this one. And basically, for Zoe, there were confettis into the landscape, and then she started basically seeing them as a point of congestion, as they would have called it, within the very rich landscape of the island. This is interestingly the very first project that the ideas of the famous Parc de la Villette project develops out of it. So it's the same idea of, let's say, this congestion point that organizes a landscape that shapes the very first take of the group for La Villette, which happens the year after. She also painted this beautifully presented, let's say, flagship of the submission to the competition, which she has started to represent vegetal form as tectonics. So various forms of trees and also their temporalities in terms of seasonalities is now almost presented as constructivist composition, if you like. The large rose slab, they're dense pine trees, and the disc is flowing there. There are cedar trees, which at the bottom there are a series of cypresses that, as you famously know, they even design how in the 5 years, 20 years, 100 years, how these kind of multiple forms of plants and trees will grow, and in their form, how they meet each other. So in a way, first they design it as two separate discs or two separate masses of vegetal forms, and then they will interact with each other. She later actually expressed her frustration from these projects because for her, this project was too dense. It was too much. It was too many people involved, and she couldn't really process all this communication between all these members, and of course the famous fights. So she started painting her own version of the project almost a couple of months later. This was not part of the official submission, but she reduced everything to the bare essentials, which actually is very similar to the project that won the competition. So if the other members would have listened to her, probably actually they would have won Parc de la Villette. She calls this one cassata, reminding her of Napolitan ice cream or sweets. She began this distancing a bit from the hectic office charrettes and spent some more time developing her own series of independent works. Nevertheless, still inspired by the tectonics and the discussion, the tectonic of the metropolitan forms and the discussion that they initiated in terms of how the landscape should be represented, seen, and designed. I'm quoting one of her sayings: "My affinity with architecture is thematic and goes into a genre that could be called pure fiction. The straight rendering gets reduced to conceptual elements that are of different nature, and they are all in state of dematerialization, and they enter the world of imagination." In these paintings, we can trace the affinities with both surrealist paintings and also constructivist traditions. The space turns into lights and shades, and altogether creates a theatrical scene whose allure and charm lies partly in the vague sense of familiarity, but at the same time, type of estrangement that it creates. This painting, which is called Shapes in Space from 1992, shadows appear to fall in multiple directions, and perhaps we can also find some vague similarities between Dali's dream scenes in Hitchcock's Spellbound movie. I don't know if you've watched it, if you've seen it, which is a series of sequences that Dali designs for Hitchcock's, which is a dream scenes that she was very much interested in those discussions, not specifically in these scenes, but discussions of the dream that shows itself into the tectonic shadows and light plays the main role. and the architecture or the tectonics becomes frozen in time. This kind of frozen movement in these paintings are actually reanimated by taking the audience into the scene. Solid shapes melts into air, the mist crystallizes into shard, and in a kind of perpetual movement, gaze is invited to leave the scene and leave it outside the frame of this stage set, if you like. As if the scenes are set in motion, dragging the observers into the world of mania or melancholy. Of course, having this painting on the wall, I should also mention the influence that Zoe Zengelis had on Zaha Hadid. So she was basically the one that introduced Zaha Hadid to paintings. And it was actually Zaha that invited first Zoe to run a crash course of color for her 5th-year student at the AA. According to Zoe, Zaha was unsure about the use of color at the time, but she was influenced by the OMA work and this discussion, and she had a very close relationship with Zoe and Madeline. So the workshop went so well that school director of the time, Alvin Boyarsky, invited Zoe Zengelis and Madeline Friesendorp to permanently run a course for the entire school. Here we are seeing one of the students' project, Brian Massey, which actually is a painting beautifully painted by 4 members: the student itself, Zoe Zengelis, Zaha Hadid, and Madeline Friesendorp. So for them, it was a collaborative nature. Learning was not to be, the project was not to be necessarily represented into a final product to be celebrated. It was a process, and this was, as Brian told me once, this was a painting made in the course of 4 months. So ideas were tested, even the tutors were part of the painting itself. It's a very long painting, 3 meters wide. We are seeing only a portion of it. It was almost the same time that even Zaha's own projects were ink drawings mostly. However, at the same, it's the same year, 1983, that she participated in the famous competition, the Peak Leisure Club in Hong Kong, from which the career basically jumps off with the epic entry of this project, as you probably know. So she was unsure, as told by the members. She was unsure about how to represent the project, and she was very much involved also in the teaching. So she created almost a mini office at the AA and invited Zoe to start experimenting with paintings as a form of representation of this project. So the entire mountain and landscape here is painted by Zoe. Is the main image, one of the main images of the project, as you know. And the slabs are painted by Zaha. We can see, of course, similarities, not surprisingly, in other works of Zoe Zengelis in her own independent work that she developed in the years after. During more than 60 years of practice, she has developed a unique artistic career that not only contributed to the tradition of the modernist painting, but also I would dare to say that it's revolutionized architectural practice and discipline. Her fundamental role in the foundation of OMA in their projects, at least in the first 15 years, and her own independent work, as well as the teaching, in a way created the culture that introduced painting as a mode of thinking and design. Designing through colors, designing through lights, designing through the medium of brush. Her own distinct color palette in the OMA project and independent works has become almost inseparable part of the architectural history, if you like. During the last 3 years specifically, this research was presented into a series of exhibitions and just recently also published as a book, which is just out. 2 copies are on the table if you want to flip through. This is a photo of the AA exhibition that we had, and the latest exhibition was at the Carnegie Museum in Pittsburgh in the United States. Each exhibition has its own theme, so it was not one touring exhibition. For example, in this one, we kind of focus on the process and on the educational nature of the project. So we showed many of the in progress drawings and paintings, and also works of the students. An extensive summary of it is also can be found in the book. So in a way, the publication, and I'm finishing with that, the publication attempts to almost traces this development that we briefly discussed, development from her own education training as interior designer, set designer, painter into the world of architecture, and then her departure back to the independent painting practices. Numerous interviews and archival work is kind of blended and processed together in order to create a fair image of Zoe Zengelis's practice, and also bringing to the discussion and to the front of architectural history the role of the two women who were the central elements of one of the offices that we know very well, OMA. Of course, these were not the only victims of professional negligence or let's say historical lousiness, if you like, but at least this was an attempt to give them stage in order to express themselves into her own work, into her own memories, into sharing her own practices in their own right. If they're artists, they speak through the work of art, through its properties and particularities. The publication includes an interview, an extensive interview that Zoe takes us to many of the details that we discussed. Many of those early projects are discussed through their process of making and the references that they all use. There's a particular chapter dedicated to landscape projects and specifically the island of Kefalonia. And also the theatrical nature of the work is discussed with an art historian, very young and good friend of ours, Gertrude Gibbons, where she discusses, she places Zoe Zengelis's artistic career within the tradition of modernist British painting. And also a small chapter by Kenneth Frampton that discusses the importance and the fundamental role of such an artistic practice within the discourse of architecture today. The publication concludes with two almost personal notes, one by Tatiana Barnes, Zoe Zengelis's granddaughter, to bring about her humorous, human, and friendly nature of Zoe Zengelis, as she claims, which was always the binding element in all the collective works, because there need to be different roles, and one should be, let's say, the one that's the generous one, basically the one that receives all the critiques, the one that resolves all the critiques, and in a way coordinate the rest of and choreographs the rest of the dynamics. Apparently in Tatiana's work has been Zoe. And a small note by Ilya Zengelis, which discusses Zoe Zengelis's fundamental career and fundamental role in shaping OMA as an office and as a career. As a final note, I would like to just point out on one inherent qualities of Zengelis's painting. There seemed to be an elusive message within her painting, a suggestion of a space that expands beyond the frame. The eye of the viewer move gradually from the actual presented paintings or project to the forms that are beyond, that inhabits the space around it, and also not only the physical space, but also the imaginary space, the space imagined, and forms becomes formless, and of course live longer. The shades comes to life and eventually becomes the city. Thank you. Also a long ranch. It's supposed to be a bit shorter, but
to do. Good. So I think it was very, very interesting, very fascinating, and I suppose you have questions. So it's the moment. Hello? Who wants to start?
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. It was really beautiful, and it's so nice to see black and white photos at the AA as well. I used to study there, so it feels really close to me. I have two questions, and one is more on the work, one specific work, and the other one is a question for you. So the first question is about the project of the 16 villas, and I just wonder whether there's any representation of that painting with landscape or not. Because all the other, I mean, some of the other works you showed were really heavy on landscape. And I imagine those villas were probably located in nature. And I just found really interesting that, yeah, I guess you can see in the drawing, but not in the painting.
yes. You want me to just respond?
Yeah, as you want.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just quickly, I mean, actually in this project, the landscape has a dramatic topography. So the first thing was how to organize the connections between these villas, because again, they sit in different niveaus, if you like. So all these, let's say, linear elements, path and slabs or connections that still, even they're not clear what they are in terms of materiality or the function, program, etc. It was an attempt to carve through the landscape and to almost dismiss the landscape. So in a way, it was part of the first idea of Ilias and Gelis to, I mean, it's my word, it's not his word, to dominate the landscape and to organize it as a metropolitan form. And therefore, he uses urban infrastructure, or urban language, or metropolitan language in order to connect or dissect or bypass a series of features, landscape features. And kind of contrary to the other ones, that there is a kind of very particular identity to landscape, I don't know, olive trees or a specific tidal relation to the coast, etc. This one is almost barren. So in a way, that's why, as Zoe explains, basically for her, it turns into almost nothing. So what matters, because first of all, they don't understand what those connections could be. So what remains out of this kind of series of discussions about this project as a whole is a kind of vague scene for her. Actually, she says that I painted it as a question mark, so almost to just show this kind of tectonic moment that these forces come together. So the nodes of these forces that represent themselves in the discussion of the 1980s folies, or these kind of forms that they become confettis.
Because this is actually really where that project
Exactly.
Came from.
Exactly.
And in fact, it's interesting that you show these cassata drawings by Zoe, and you said, well, you know, she returned to the essence of the project. Because in fact, the confetti, not the strips, were the first concept.
Yeah.
And there was a struggle between Ilya and Rand, because Ilya was obsessed with the confetti, while Rand was obsessed with the strips.
Exactly.
And the result was, as you said, chaotic. Actually, the whole competition process was very chaotic.
Exactly.
And I think that the confetti is really Zoe somehow reduction of what led to the essence.
Yeah, cassata. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, I have a question. I mean, I think, first of all, thank you for the talk, it was amazing. And I mean, what I would call really a strong revision of establish narratives, and I think that this is really the work to be done in the next years. Sorry, to somehow correct this autopoiesis of the big masters that somehow always erase anyone else's contribution. So I think that this is a really, I mean, beside the topic, I think this is a tradition of studies that we really have to support, because it will really contribute to an idea of architecture that will be more collective and less based on the lone genius who apparently has all the ideas. So I think for me it's very important that, I mean, I see this talk really as a pioneer of this, and I think there have been also other attempts of this kind, but I think yours is a very intense one. And I think, and also there is another issue that I would like you to elaborate a bit more, because I know that, I mean, you have a strong interest in drawing in general and in representation, and I think you said something about it, like you know, we cannibalize so much architectural drawings, and have, you know, in recent years there have been almost like a fetishism, a fetishistic kind of a reappraisal, but then we are very sloppy in really understanding, you know, where they sit, what they represents. So I wonder whether what you are trying to, you know, through the work of Zoe Zengelis, what you are actually trying to claim back is somehow the autonomy of representation as something that is actually, that cannot be completely subsumed neither to painting nor to the project. Now that has this kind of liminal, let's say, position. I mean, and there are of course very important precedents. I mean, the work of Piranesi, although he never used painting, he used engraving, but in a way has that kind of aspect, but also the work of Joseph Gandhi, the rendered of John Soane. So I wonder whether this is really a project at stake in your work.
But, I mean, definitely. I mean, you gave the answer as well. So that's I have personal passion for architectural drawing, and not necessarily a kind of specific, let's say, dogmatic idea about whether it should be only hand-drawn or hand-painted or digital, not necessarily that, just acknowledging what the drawing represents, what it is, and it has its own property. Sometimes there are ways that, let's say, for example, we simply print, but into a page that is, its dimension is given to us. It's A3, it's A4, it's a printer. The first thing that, if you want to paint it or if you want to draw it, the first thing that you decide is a frame. How big it should be and how it should be represented is the frame that you buy first or you make. And it has its own ritual of how to frame it, how to stretch the canvas, etc. So this almost a conscious reminder of what these steps are and how they contribute into decision makings in design and representation, which in fact, as Pier Vittorio beautifully summarized, lead to kind of celebration of the autonomy of architectural drawing. All this architectural drawing has a property. They have dimensions. They cannot be, let's say, ignored. The frame is decided. For this book, I had to measure this 186 drawings because it's important how big they are. That's the first thing to understand. Basically, is something that we now reduce it into digital culture, into resolution. Brush stroke is an inseparable part of the entire setup. Is the proportional relationship between the brush and the frame, and of course the technique, the medium, creates a specific resolution that discusses the idea of the project in a certain way. Not again being obsessively discussing hand painting or artistry here, but just to bring it back to the conscious discussion of how do we represent and how do we decide on a specific properties of any architectural representation here, which at the end I hope, and what I want to claim is that the drawing is the project most of the time. So at least is inseparable part of the project. It cannot be seen separately. And also it is a process. So, and in order to understand what the project is, or in order to discuss it, we need to discuss it inevitably, the process of the image. You had another question, which
about your methodology when you teach. The second question was about your methodology when you teach, and you were showing the beautiful unifying power of painting in the case of Zoe, and how that overcome fights, or it was kind of like a compromise almost, and a negotiation tool. And I just wanted to know whether in your practice, I guess painting has a role, or what you learn from the extensive archive work you did. And yeah.
Yes, but again, as not necessarily as a kind of a product that we are obsessed with. So we don't ask a student to paint. Actually, they painted last year. I mean, one of the best projects that Pierre Vittorio also reviewed was a painting, oil painting. The problem was we had to wait for it to be dried for a month. It was not ready for the end of the year. But again, what we try to discuss with the students, with my partner Platan Isaias, is again a conscious steps to be taken. What is to be drawn and why the image, or what is to be composed out of these ideas, is inseparable part of the project itself. It has to, the project could be unfolded through the image. Mm-hmm. And this quality is inevitably makes the maker, the students, or whomever, the architect, takes all the steps consciously in order to be able to retrace it back. So it is not, they are not paintings to be coupled with 5 other things, or to be both shown as a model, physical model, and a 3D model, and a movie, and a painting. They need to decide what the project is from the beginning. So we don't go with the kind of multiplicity of medium in order to, let's say, almost create a moment of, let's say, consumption of the image, that idea. They need to decide what their medium is from almost mid-year, almost term 2. And then from then onwards, their discussion basically is through that medium. Thank
you. I had a curiosity. We heard of the 4 members of OMA, or 5 now, separately or in relationship to each other. Now I wondered if you can tell us more how Madelon Vriesendorp and Zoe Zengelis maybe work together, or how they, because after the book on Madelon Vriesendorp, we saw all the paintings she did. Now Zoe Zengelis, and yeah, I wondered this link, sure, if you can tell a bit more.
Madelon has her own distinct contribution to the entire discourse through her amazing surrealist painting and the series that she developed independently from actually the book, Delirious New York. She again mentioned a couple of months ago that she didn't even know that Rem Koolhaas would use these paintings in the book, or even putting it on the cover. It's a moment that they are not in a good relationship with each other. Actually, she's very pissed that he did it. So without any credits, without any permission, because actually the correspondence between Zoe and Madelon shows that Madelon is developing that series of drawings independently. Of course, they are influenced by the discussion, but her medium basically is following a kind of, she was trained as a art restoration. So she collects, let's say, objects of arts, and that's how her independent practice also develops into making of a collection of ready-made sculptures, the recent, let's say, post-OMA artistic practice of Madelon's. But what she was very interested in while in New York was the postcards. And therefore, those surrealist paintings started to blend into each other through the kind of fragments of found in the postcards and popular magazines. She contributed together with Zoe into a very few, as a duo, in a very few paintings. So only 3 paintings, one from the Dutch Parliament competition. They worked both of them together, and 2 of the Belver Palace Hotel, which then she repainted some of those delirious paintings into the kind of lobbies and also the penthouses of the project. I don't think I have an image of it, but at least the first 15 years of OMA, Zoe was the office painter, so she had to produce. Madeline was on and off because of the family situation, because of she was having kids, so she had to take care of Charlie and Thomas. So in a way, there is a kind of not a kind of full presence of Madeline as in the same way that that Zoe was basically had to make the projects because they had to submit it to the competition or client. But they work together, and they still work together on paintings.
This was also from my side one of the questions to understand better the relations among the 4. So in fact, we didn't speak not so much either of Elias and Gelis. So, but maybe this would open too much because then we are really in the big issues. But I have a question that is very starting from the object, that a painting. That is the time, no? The time question. And you were saying about the oil painting that you need 1 month to have it dried up. So she was using acrylics
For the office project, yeah.
For the office project. So that was faster. However, to paint, I mean, it's something that you cannot do in one night. Well, maybe yes, you can. Of course, there are paintings that come out, but this type of so detailed painting, they cannot. So my question is really about the conception of the project. Now, you said before, I take your creating a project through a painting, so conceiving the project through a painting. But how was it possible? I mean, or do we have to think that there were several corrections ongoing? I don't know, but in an office, when you have a competition, no, it's the last minute everything. So how can you make a painting during a competition? And maybe she was very fast. I don't know. She was, but in any case, she needed time. And during this time, of course, the project probably was evolving. So at the end, she had to come back, repaint, erase. I mean, is it something like, I don't know, the big painting of the Cappella Sistina, where you find things hidden under? How is it this time question? Or is it because maybe we have lost something and we don't have that type of time she still had? I don't know.
Each particular project has its own story and history, but there are part of the project, for example, this one, that, for example, it doesn't have a plan or it doesn't have a section. It is a painting. So from day one, it's a painting. So, and the way that the ideas transmit to each other or change or evolve into repainting. She is painting, for example, they're now changing the plinth and composition of the programs on in the neck of the Sphinx or hotel. And each one has its own problems. But then
sorry, but this is not a competition.
Not a competition. It was a competition, but it was kind of a loose competition. Yeah. But the other competitions that are, I mean, like Dutch Pavilion, Dutch Parliament, she starts paintings. Exactly the same conflict happens. So out of the first brainstorming that they decide on the main ideas, she starts painting the skeleton of the ideas. Then things change. Then she's behind the wheel. So she decides what to paint. So there are letters that Rem is asking her, I don't know, we actually design another building. I don't see it in the painting. So she said, no, this is much more beautiful. I don't know, the very idea, there is a kind of very integral part of these projects that later will be was developed and known as the floating pool. I don't know, probably some of you know about it. I'll go back to this image. So basically the floating pool was, according to the letters and correspondence, was Zoe Zangelis's desire. For her, it was an unbalanced project because they were all about extension of the urbanity into the river, and the river was not occupied by the design, by the ideas that they put forward. They had to have something. So she started the first iteration of the floating pool that was later developed into the story of the floating pool by Koolhaas as a manifesto. So it shows that basically, at least the correspondence, that the actual material shows that she had the liberty and into choosing out of that kind of mess of a discussion, what to put inside the paintings. And of course, this is not a peaceful process. So it's not by chance that all the partners split it. And of course, families in a way were destroyed and so on and so forth. But and also there are stories that they were late always. So especially, I mean, I had interviews with other collaborators of the La Villette projects, Ron Steiner, that had to rent a car because they couldn't really work with the post office, etc., because they were too late. He had to drive from London to Paris to deliver the last panel because there was no time. So he says that I started driving 2 o'clock in the night, and the submission was 8 o'clock in the morning after, so I had to drive all the night to bring it there. So, of course, this is also.
But you have an idea, or you discuss with her the question of layers and erasures in the paintings.
She does. She even cuts out part of the projects. so because I mean there are examples that it's in the book, but it's not in the presentation. That for her, for example, in the Checkpoint Charlie, the city was not that of a kind of a main contributor to the project, and also she has her own critique of the design that, okay, we didn't talk about the city, so it is a building, very normal building, and she was not really happy with it. So she started imagining almost a barren landscape as Berlin, West Berlin at the time, next to the wall, removing part of the project that was designed by Ilya or by the team. So this thing happens, of course, and in these particular projects, there were technical documents supporting it. So they didn't lose the commission because there were intensive plans and sections and details. But there are others that, especially, for example, in the Dutch parliament, the paintings that were submitted are totally different from, for example, section that Ilya drew. So they are not matching. So some of the buildings are missing. So she was interpreting.
So in that sense, is really conceiving the project. She was really, because also of this time fracture, I would say, exactly. The way in which you conceive during a competition, a project is so hectic, is so not that you have some difficulty to imagine a process that nevertheless is slow as the one of painting, which means that in fact there were parallel roads. So several projects were conceived at the same time.
Exactly.
That's very interesting. And I don't know if in your research, because that for me can open another way to read the contributions and to read the projects, to imagine that in fact it was not just the conception and the debate about this conception, but really the elaboration of different projects
that then come together at a certain moment, or they don't come together and they just stay as parallel projects. And I don't know if there is an analysis of the parallel projects that stay together with a common basis of discussion, but then with a conception and elaboration that is plural. Because Pier Vittorio, you were speaking about the plurality, not the collective. But here is a plurality that is not really generating the unique, is really maintaining differences in a way,
orchestrating
different interpretations. And I think it's very interesting, like the story of the La Villette, for example, project is very interesting.
With this one that she basically didn't, I mean,
Why she decided not to show.
The project.
In fact, especially starting with in the mid 80s, I think there was a process of editing out a lot of drawings and representations of OMA work, because there was actually, of course, this, it was coming. Everybody knew that the new big thing was the computer drawing. In fact, I think there was a little fight when L'Architecture d'aujourd'hui made a publication of monographic publication of OMA, because RAM insisted to have a computer rendering on the cover, which of course was like the goodbye, to this painting work. And Ilya was very, very upset. I don't know if we can tell these stories, but anyway, actually there was really a moment where, Colas, being someone who is always on the lookout for the next trend, he knew that basically the 90s would be about computer. And I think he almost felt embarrassed that basically most of the work of OMA until that point was actually made of paintings, which actually, in the euphoria of the 90s was considered a dead medium. Painting actually also in art history, the 90s is like, maybe only Gerhard Richter survived. It was like an Armageddon for painting. And I think that when, SMLXL came out, all this representational style was in fact deleted. And in fact, if you look to the book, all the projects until the 90s, at least the early projects, were reproduced all in black and white. Exactly. Somehow this kind of atmosphere, this kind of ethos was completely destroyed. And in fact, the more successful graphics of OMA of the 90s became the dominant image. And so now it's interesting to look back to this work because they cast an interesting light of what OMA is doing now. And, you feel like, they're missing something, to be very honest. Exactly what, Paula, you were saying, the kind of plurality, the kind of, let's say, fact that there were different people interpreting the work in different ways. And I think that after a certain point, the work of OMA becomes much more uniform. And I think that's interesting. It's true that at the beginning, this kind of plurality is much more visible and is much more, and makes the work less predictable in a way. Yeah.
There's a very funny small anecdotes that how she would operate within this environment. They're working, their office were their house, basically. So she's always sitting in the middle of the living room. Ilya and Revin are working in the kitchen. And the other collaborators are staying in the steps and the staircases to make models and to do smaller sketches. And the fantastic, part of it that the men is, let's say, exiled into the kitchen is almost the best part of the entire scene, if you want to imagine it.
Another thing. Then, of course, please, if you want to jump in, someone would like to. Okay, so let's first.
Could you read?
Yeah, so Saba Baranis, want to thank you very much for the fascinating research and presentation. And according to what Pier Vittorio also mentioned, is interested to know a bit more about the agency and the role of this painting in critical and sociopolitical perspectives that OMA had in these early years.
It is a kind of contested ground to be discussed because exactly the same plurality existed in also their, if you like, ideologies. I mean, of course, their fascination with Berlin Wall, that everything started from there, and the separation and the city as a kind of safe haven for the humanity, and metropolis as a safe haven for the humanity to be rediscovered and to be cherished. And what Koolhaas specifically claim as the culture of congestion is, and the social condenser, reinvention of the social condenser is the key, which should present itself into some of the landscape project, also specifically Koolhaas's version of La Villette, Parc de la Villette. But we cannot say the same thing about, for example, the other three founding members. In those kind of tagging or theorization and communication of bluntly and explicitly all those socio-political reflection, Koolhaas had the higher voice, and he was the one that had to communicate. But the other three members, basically, I mean, if I tried many times to ask Zoe Zengelis about it, and she deliberately refuses that she had any political, let's say, hidden political agendas in her own paintings. She was, of course, inspired by the entire Russian tradition of painting, but it doesn't mean that she was in one way or another in line or inclined with, let's say, any specific ideologies. So that's why I kind of started reminding ourselves and quoting Frank Auerbach that they were refusing, at least, or the artists, they were refusing the grand narratives and socio-political agendas and defining themselves as a soul painter, as a coherent artist unit, if you like.
Yeah, speaking of painting.
Speaking of painting, yeah.
No, I'm more this aesthetic ground. No, I think that I found really beautiful the one made by Zoe Zengelis together with Zadid.
Yeah, the student project.
No, not the student. The competition.
The competition.
The
yeah.
competition.
Yes.
When you said that she made,
Yes,
the landscape, and because this landscape kind of futuristic type of, and then this very neat, let's say, architecture that is arriving. I think and also these objects now that's almost included into the ground work. I think it's really powerful, very, very, very beautiful. I mean, just to say that the collaboration among these two ladies is amazing. I think is even more, it's even stronger than other images that you showed.
I would say the same thing. Of course, Zahedi inherently was an artist as well. I mean, it shows in the other works. So in a way, that's why finding a shared language or let's say a common ground to work with Zoe was not of a difficult ideas or difficult projects for them. So that's why she invited Zoe to also teach at the AA.
Questions, comments?
First of all, thank you for the presentation. It was quite amazing to have all these materials that some of them are not even well known. Mine is a comment more to this technique that they were using in the Dutch competition for the Dutch parliament, where the way you described it, basically, it seems that the fact that they were subdividing their roles, so everybody took a part and developed it like autonomously, and so they have to put everything together. It seems quite natural from them. So, which reminds me the fact that they already use this technique for the Exodus projects, for example. It was done more or less according to this technique, but it was also the way through which Zengelis, Elia Zengelis and Colas were teaching at the diploma unit by the Architecton. So I wonder how this kind of, also the idea of plurality that was being discussed, or the idea of the collective, was kind of implicit in the very beginning of the work of OMA to really manifest the production of architecture also in a collective way, and how this technique was perhaps the representation of this kind of methodology of design, basically. How did it represent collective work?
I mean, it's my personal, basically, if I detach myself as a kind of historian of this, let's say, little stories, and I see myself as a kind of receiver of such lessons from their work. Exactly, this is a point that I would be interested as a practitioner or teacher to learn from, the collaborative nature and the way that they reconceptualized almost the way of, let's say, developing an idea. They famously and explicitly discussed the Dada techniques of the games. That's, of course, Explicit Corpse is one of them, which was developed as a kind of play of words and then later images. So, which there is a kind of aesthetic attached to it, which we associated with collage making later on. But for them, what was at the core of this technique was a kind of critique of authorship and critique of singularity of ideas. I mean, this is very much reflected also in words when Ilya Zengelis talks about some of these projects. So they call themselves random associations of distant mind. So, which in a way, of course, when you put it in the perspective, it perfectly makes sense. But at the same time, when you frame it within a kind of practicalities of submission to a project, there need to be a conductor behind the wheel to really blend all these layers of the distant minds together into a painting or into a drawing.
If I can add just one
course.
last comment, this is by comparison also what makes the difference between the work of OMA in the 90s, which totally changes. It remains collective, but this idea of the abstraction of using a kind of diagrammatic form of organization also in the office would really anticipate this idea of the office of architecture as a place of exploitation, basically. So it's interesting how it remains as a kind of collaborative, let's say, form of working, but at the same time, it changed completely the organization.
I think there inevitably there was a hierarchy introduced, not necessarily through, I'm not here talking about, and again, I need to have a disclaimer here. I mean, none of the part of this story means that, for example, Ilya Zengelis or Rem Koolhaas, they didn't play the role well. Of course, there were geniuses behind all these projects, and there still are. But the whole, let's say, that the implicit message of the presentation and bringing forward, for the sake of the discussion, work of Zoe Zengelis was to see how let's say, balanced in some way or another, the collaboration between the four founding members played out, at least in the first projects. Inevitably, when they needed to sell or to build, or there was a hierarchy introduced in the way of working. And that's why the sub-offices started founding itself in Rotterdam and Athens, and even the painters or the artists remained in London to distance themselves from the core of the choreography, if you like, which later developed into two different stories, Ilya's branch and Rem Koolhaas's branch in Rotterdam.
Is about computation, how like she leads with Koolhaas and also Zaha Hadid entering this world, and she was not also captivating by this world. She didn't want to experiment this world of computation and drawing modeling on computer. she was not into it. Why? And
You mean Zoe?
yes, yes, yes.
Zoe Zengelis.
Yes.
Basically, she stepped off the ship just before, I mean, the profession used digital modeling as the main tool of thinking, or even, let's say, rendering some of the ideas. So she doesn't relate to. So, and also, I started asking the same question, how do you feel? I mean, were you part of a discussion where the office started working with digital drawings? She basically was saying that that was not my word, and I was, let's say, dividing tasks between the groups that were working with digital media and computation, and I was at my corner doing my own job. So in a way, but we made an experimentation which resulted in a interesting, again, friendly conversation. For one of the exhibition, I worked with an artist that we started animates and remodel one of Zoe's paintings. So as if it's a three-dimensional space that we can walk through, not the OMA paintings, but the actual independent paintings. Then I played the movie for her for 5 minutes, walking into these spaces and different lights, and in a way, what we claim that the painting does, we try to make it for her this time. She was amazed. I mean, she basically claimed that this is my painting. So as she walked through an animation, that things were changing, of course, for the AA exhibition we did. So, and we actually designed pedestals of the exhibition according to the forms that she's very famously painting. So in a way, even walking in the exhibition and knowing that the way to receive and perceive the space is through walk, as if you're walking through your painting, worked well. And I think she might be interested to learning more about digital modeling and also those tools, but not as a modes of, let's say, developing ideas, but actually as a modes of thinking. But probably the medium won't change. The medium still would be painting for her, but as a mode of thinking or perceiving space, at least that experiment worked.
Yeah, just more of a comment than anything else. Just looking at the project for the Checkpoint Charlie project, I think one of the three collaborators was Matthias Sauerbruck from Saarbrücken and from the Berlin practice, and who I worked for briefly a while ago. And I know that color is a very important part of their work, Louisa Hutton in particular.
Exactly.
And I wonder if, you know, being part of that same AA scene, if I wonder if she was influenced by that. And what's interesting is that in none of these projects was color actually carried through into the architecture. Like I don't associate OMA with being particularly colorful buildings, unlike Saarbrücken, where it's actually brought into the architecture. So just to
yes and no.
Yes.
For example, especially in this painting, interior is actually defined through colors. Matthias was part of it. Matthias actually in this is Matthias. He was a student. Actually, in the first building that they managed to build, which is Checkpoint Charlie, color is everything. Actually, signage is part of it. So they paint the movement of people and cars on the ground floors. So there are signs that shows how you should walk, almost in an obsessive way. But the way that it represents itself into Saarbrücken works later into facades or using the material with color, so in a way becomes almost the foreground of the projects. This, of course, I don't see the same similarities in the way that the early projects of OMA intended to be, because none of which were built. So in a way, there's a paradox here. So perhaps if they were built, they were colorful, but one of the first one that in the OMA OMA Rotterdam built is the fire station, which is basically concrete But again, we see the color in the theater projects, the Hague Theater, that is everywhere. Basically, Madelon paints the wall. So the wall painting of the mural is Madelon. Madelon basically did it herself. Not only designed it, but she executed it as well. But I mean, this needs to be discussed on case by case. But there is an amazing, let's say, discussion if color. I mean, we could have this amazing discussion, which is another chapter, if the color represents itself into spatial experimentation or spatial forms and tectonics parallel to the elements of architecture, or remains as a kind of central atmospheric layer when it realized in the architectural form. So I don't know.
I think we can close for today.
So, well, I think we just have to thank again Ahmed for this fantastic moment. Ahmed, really look at the two books that are on the table, and think how to invite Ahmed for another moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Her name in the form, of course. Not even her name.
Not even her name in MoMA's collection.
A few years ago, it was